Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, my friends. It's our first inner circle for this year, and I'm super excited to see all of you again. After 2 weeks, we haven't seen each other. I miss you all. Truly miss you all. And now it's our 78th session, and um, we have a special guest. Wait first, I'm trying to I just want to make a more detailed where is that okay, probably
If you can't find your notes, Cynthia, I'm happy
here I
to
have
give my own introduction.
yes, our guest speaker is AC Bergen-Fischer, and we call him Antoni. Antoni, correct? Is that correct?
Antoni, AC, whichever's more comfortable for you.
Okay, Antoni. And he is an estrangement reconciliation coach, an inspirational speaker, an activist, a philosopher, a writer, a producer, host of In the Blood, and the co-host of the Estranged Heart. And his hope is that those who hear his message will be inspired to find their own voices and connect with versions of themselves which have been silenced through trauma. He has a specific passion for connecting people to their platonic relationships through helping them to establish and maintain healthy relationships with self. So it's going to be a very nice session for tonight, and it's about how to have a healthy relationship with our children. So let us welcome AC Bergen-Fischer, or for short, Antoni. Welcome, AC. Welcome, Antoni. I don't know which one.
AC is easier to spell, I think.
Okay, AC. So
Yeah,
glad to
it's
have you
like,
here, AC.
yeah,
Okay.
I'm thrilled to be here. And when you said that the topic or the theme this month was for parenting, it was kind of exciting because a lot of the work that I do, it's talking to people, both adult children and parents that have come to a place in their relationship where everything is broken, nothing's working anymore. And so the opportunity to talk about, okay, well, how do we prevent these things? That's such an exciting opportunity rather than how do we fix what's broken? How do we keep it from breaking in the first place? That's a powerful thing. And even for anybody who's here today who maybe their kids are grown up, maybe the time for prevention might be over, maybe just gaining a little bit of understanding of where they might have gone wrong when the kids were younger. That's all helpful stuff too. It's never too late to learn about what's going on with our kids, never too late to learn how to relate a little bit better to them. It just I don't think it's ever too late until everybody involved in the situation has completely given up. And the fact that anybody is showing up here today tells me that none of you has given up. So if you do have any challenges that are going on in life, you know what? I think we still got room to fix it. So just keeping that in mind, I mean, I will be speaking probably more from the perspective of somebody who's got kids that are still under their care. But again, like I mentioned earlier, gaining a bit of understanding still, I don't really feel is a waste. Sorry, excuse me. The weather's very, very cold where I live right now, and the heat's drying out my throat. So I might have to mute my microphone on occasion just to clear my throat.
Sure, AC.
Okay, so in addition to the brilliant introduction that Cynthia's given me, you know, like I identify as some other things, right? I identify as a human. I identify as a Canadian, a man, a coach, a writer, inspirational speaker, podcaster, husband, a son, and a father. Now, some of you probably noticed that I mentioned being a father last. And that's not because it's the least important identity that I have. It's because it's the identity that I often find myself the least comfortable with. Part of that is because, like I grew up in an emotionally unstable and confusing environment. My dad grew up with a lot of trauma, and he had undiagnosed and untreated mental health challenges that I think sometimes made it really difficult for him to understand the value of creating emotionally safe spaces for me and my siblings. And quite often, in his view, emotions were seen as signs of like weaknesses or personality flaws more so than they were seen as functions of a normal person. And, because I was a boy, my dad strongly encouraged me away from crying. When I did, I was met with homophobic or sexist slurs. He would shame me verbally. He would degrade me in just any number of creative and humiliating ways. And I tried so hard not to cry, but crying came naturally to me. So I often upset and disappointed him with these uncontrolled tears. When I couldn't avoid the tears sometimes without going quiet, which my dad didn't really seem to care for. He'd try to make light of it. He'd say things, like, "Hey, cheer up," or "Stop moping," or, sometimes he'd just be out and out dismissive. And tears, sadness, being too quiet. I mean, these weren't the only things that bothered him either. Worry was one of those things that really seemed to upset him because he was a man who had like really, really strong religious beliefs, like faith in God. So he considered worry to be kind of a sinful action, or like the sign of the devil at work inside of me. Anger and frustration, of course, were also understood to be the devil in me. And he punished these things in ways which were often pretty brutal, you know? So having heard all of these things, you're probably expecting that my dad wanted me to be happy. But the reality was that happiness and excitement weren't things that he cared for either. He saw laughter as an annoyance. Happiness was empty-headedness. And when I would get excited, it was like he would get some sort of sensory overload trigger. And that really didn't bring out the best side of him. My parents often said that I should talk about whatever bothered me, but whenever I did, they dismissed what I had to say. So I stopped talking. At least I stopped talking to my parents. I stopped talking around my parents. And over the years, I went from being this quiet kid to being a quiet adult because I didn't have the self-confidence or the security to express myself in ways that were healthy, things that would have benefited me. I eventually crossed paths with a very special person who encouraged me to tell my story through answering questions, through just being honest. Like she just wouldn't let it go. If she asked a question, she wanted an honest and complete answer. It got me in the habit of telling somebody else what was going on with me. And I was having these conversations with her while doing a renovation job on her house. At the end of the job, she gave me a box with a little card in it that said, "You have a voice, use it." Along with the card was a small microphone which I used to record my first podcast. And through these conversations with her and through that gift of the microphone and the opportunity to have my first podcast, I found a voice that I didn't previously know that I had. Now, I'm tempted to go on and brag about how many times my podcasts have been downloaded, tell you that my voice has been heard all over the world. But instead, today I want to use my voice to invite you into my story. And I don't do this because I want you to feel sorry for me or to think that I'm super interesting or wise. I do it because I believe that when we hear someone else share painful or personal things, it empowers us to consider sharing our own painful and personal things. And when we get into the habit of doing that, I think we set ourselves up to be in the best possible position to relate well to other people, most especially with our kids. This exchange of details. It's one of the most powerful and inspirational tools that we as humans have at our disposal. My parents might have set a terrible example, but I feel that in doing so, they inadvertently set me up to be a successful parent who sets a positive example for his kids. And because of that, I feel like I owe them everything. Now, I don't often speak on the topic of parenting, so I don't want to present myself as an expert. As Cynthia mentioned at the beginning, my specific passion is for connecting people to their platonic relationships through helping them connect with healthy versions of themselves. Now, that being said, I believe that the relationships that we have with our kids are the most valuable and fragile relationships we have. And this is something that I think a lot of people they don't understand. They think, okay, my kids, they have to love me. Just because I was a parent, I have to love my kids. It's a two-way street. This is a solid relationship. It has to be there. But with all my years of working with people that are dealing with family estrangement, I can promise you that it's not the case. These relationships, no matter how good they are, they're never as strong as you think that they might be. They're never bulletproof for sure. There's always room for improvement. And that's what I'm hoping that we're all gonna, hopefully gain some insights on how to do today, how to improve a little bit. A little bit about my kids. I've got two of them, two boys. One is 21 years old. He is neurodivergent. He needed a lot of assistance in grade school with his academics, but I mean, he went on to become a university graduate. He completed a 4-year course in 2 years. He's a generally wonderful person. He communicates in healthy ways. His personality is so similar to mine, but when I look at him, I see what I would have been like without all the trauma and the abuse and everything else. So, I mean, I think I got to take credit for that on some level, right? Pat on the back for me. My other son is 16. He plays 6 different instruments. He tutors younger children for free, and his goal is to go to medical school and ultimately get into a career in psychiatry. So, like I know I've made my mistakes as a dad, but looking at the way my kids have turned out, are turning out, I feel like maybe I've done more good than harm. And again, not to gloat, not to brag, but I mean these are things that are within reach for all of us. Not everybody's kid is going to land on the moon. Not everybody's kid is going to be president, but everybody's kid is going to be awesome in the parents' eyes, and the relationship can be awesome too. So as we spend the next half hour or so together, I want each of you to consider your own experiences. I might be the experience, I might be the expert on my story, but you guys are each the expert on yours. And my goal is to encourage, it's not to judge. It is to share my experience, not to inform you. And I want all of you to understand that I stand among you. I'm not like up on a podium looking down at you. And hopefully I have something valuable to offer. And I'm sure Like I'm positive, in fact, that I've got something valuable to gain today. So let's get into it. When I was growing up, my parents' main objectives seemed to center around doing whatever was necessary to keep us kids in line. Sound familiar? The rules were usually pretty clearly communicated, and the consequences for breaking them were often harsh. Now, I don't think any parent establishes a system like this unless they really, really want their kids to comply. So while I understand the motivation behind this approach, and I might even respect the effort put into teaching kids how to behave, I think that this approach misses the mark. If our goal is to train our kids to be good kids, then this probably makes a lot of sense. And while I agree that training our kids to be, quote unquote, good is an important part of parenting, I don't think it comes even close to being the main goal of it, at least not in my opinion. And I'm sure from past experience that some of you are probably fighting the urge to roll your eyes at me a little bit right now. Some of you might be feeling targeted. And, at the end of the day, few of us really want to be wrong, and few of us want to waste our time being misinformed, which is fair. But I'm hoping that you will hear me out. People often ask me why I get along so well with my kids, or what is the secret to having well-rounded, accomplished, decent human beings for young adult and adult kids. And I tell them it's actually not that complicated. Where most parents get hung up on the idea that they're teaching kids to be good, I focus on the goal of preparing adults for life in the real world. I never wanted my kids to get to a certain age before that happened. I started literally from day one. I think one of the most frustrating things about my parents was the way they always seemed to talk down to me. Even as a small child, I really, really wanted to be talked to like I wasn't somehow less than. So when I became a father, I remembered that feeling very well, and I resolved to go out of my way to make sure that my kids didn't feel that same way. When my oldest was an infant, my mother used to constantly scold me because I didn't use baby talk when I spoke to him. I spoke to him using clear words, and I chose the same tones that I would have used when speaking with an adult. And maybe it wasn't fun or cute enough by some people's standards, but I felt that this was the best way to teach him. I like to think that I not only taught him how words were supposed to be pronounced, but that I also laid the foundation for the idea that he had a father who respected him. Teaching my kids, it's always been really, really important to me. And building my own credibility in their eyes has been equally important. Because after all, I mean, how are they supposed to respect the guidance of somebody who they don't trust? So now that you all have a basic understanding of what my parenting goals are, what they were, how they came to be, I would like to shift slightly into what I see our jobs as parents to be. As I've already hinted at, one of those jobs is to be a teacher. It starts off with simple things. We teach our kids that they need rest. We teach them that their bodies need nutrition. We teach them the importance of cleanliness, both for their person and for their surroundings. We teach them which things are okay to touch. We teach them which things are hot or yucky or dangerous. We teach them how to count, say the alphabet, how to tie their shoes, and many, many other things. And while we're doing this, it can be extremely easy to also teach them what to think. And I want to let you ponder that for a moment to see if you can figure out why that might be a problem. I heard a story years ago about a woman who was learning how to make roast beef from her mother. And one of the things her mom taught her was to cut the ends off of the roast before putting it in the baking pot. And when the daughter asked her mom why that was necessary, the mom looked puzzled and said that she really wasn't sure of the reason. That's just the way that her mom had taught her. So mom didn't know why she always cut the ends off the roast, but she had taught her daughter that was right without even thinking about it. So when she called her own mother to ask the reason, she learned that her mother's baking pot wasn't large enough to fit a normal roast. So the ends had to be trimmed off until it fit. And, like how many of these lessons do we teach our kids? When we tell them what to think, how to act, the right or wrong ways to do things, we're often just parroting the things that we've been taught. And maybe our egos tell us that we figured things out, so our kids shouldn't need to. That's a common one, right? But that doesn't really set our kids on a path that leads to successfully navigating life as an adult in the real world. While we are taking the time to teach our kids, we also need to encourage their own curiosity. I've often encouraged my kids to challenge the things that they're taught as well. Because, like, I don't want them to blindly question everything they're told. I had to teach them how to recognize when, if, or how to challenge things. I've gone out of my way to avoid telling them what to think and instead try to teach them how to think. You see the difference there? Some people they think these are the same thing, but hear me out. I think I've already shared a good example of what to think. The ends of the roast need to be cut off before it goes in the oven. I think we're all clear on the problem there at this point, right? An example of how to think was offered by the daughter in the same story, who saw no logical reason to cut the ends off the roast, and she attempted to make sense of it. She didn't disrespect her mom by saying, "You're wrong." She simply asked, "Why is it necessary?" Because she sincerely wanted to know. As parents, it's very, very easy to get tired of answering the why questions. Now, is it possible that they're so tiring, not just because they are relentless, which they are, but also because we haven't actually thought about the answers to why? When our kids get used to us being patient and knowledgeable and honest enough to admit that we don't know everything, they can't help it. They get used to trusting us. They get used to being comfortable in asking questions. Most importantly, they get used to being respected. So we've talked about how we're teachers, how we're encouragers, and I think now I'd like to take a bit of time to explore how we are providers. Well, this part doesn't sound terribly profound to any of us who's got kids, I'm sure. Of course, we're supposed to provide for our kids. We give them food, we give them shelter, clothing, maybe a few too many toys or gadgets sometimes. We also go out of our way to give them better than what we had growing up, right? My parents told me all the time about how much better I had it than they did when they were kids. Even when I got beaten with a rod, my dad was quick to tell me that he'd been beaten with barbed wire, so my life was comparatively easy. As an adult, I heard from them how they did their best. I heard how they gave me things that they didn't have, how they showed me love that wasn't shown to them. My parents had a long list of all the things which were provided to me, afforded to me, and that they thought I owed them gratitude for. And I don't want to sound ungrateful at all, but that was their job. They didn't give me anything extra or special or noteworthy or extraordinary. They did what they were supposed to do and nothing more. As a dad, I love it when my kids show appreciation, but I never ask for it. I never expect it. I'm just doing my job too. I provide for their practical needs as well as I can. I support them as well as I know how, but I'm always learning how to expand my limits. And I never, ever communicate that I always do my best. I don't know if that last point caught you off guard, but the truth is that I don't think any of us do our best as parents 100% of the time. Mostly, we exhaust the outer limits of our convenience and comfort. Occasionally, we do our best, but I think our kids know that that's not true every minute of every day. And we can't pretend differently without losing their respect. Okay, now that we've all had our feelings hurt by the knowledge that giving to our kids won't earn a parade in our honor, let's try, let's try to move on towards something a little bit more uplifting. So I don't know how many of you remember a TV show in the 90s called Due South. One of the main characters is one of my favorite fictional people of all time, Constable Benton Fraser. And he shared a quote during one of the episodes that really stuck with me. He said, "You can give your son anything you want, but if you don't leave him a good example of how to be a man, you'll leave him nothing." So, as it's 2024, probably a more gender neutral version is appropriate. You can give your kid anything you want, but if you don't leave them a good example of how to conduct themselves, you've left them nothing. My dad obviously didn't do everything right. In fact, I think he messed up in some pretty epic ways. That said, I think he did a good job of teaching me how to conduct myself. And sometimes that was just by showing me how I didn't want to be. And sometimes it was by showing me how I did want to be. One of the most profound lessons he taught me, I don't even think was intentional. He taught me the value of acknowledging one's own mistakes, especially to one's kids. And maybe he was a little late in teaching that particular lesson, but he did eventually teach it very, very well. He came to a point where he understood how much damage he had done to his children, and he owned up to all of it, every single bit of it. He apologized, but he still understood that sometimes what has been done can't be undone, and that we can't expect to excuse someone just because they make excuses. I'm tired. Money is tight. I'm stressed from work. I'm overwhelmed. I'm not as bad as my parents. I did my best. Our kids don't want to hear these things. Our kids want to be validated in their own experiences. Like, this might sound harsh, but it is not their job to validate or appreciate us. I'll let you sit with that for a minute. I've worked for several years with people who are struggling with family estrangement. And most of the people I work with are either parents of adult children or they are adult children themselves. What comes up more often than not is a parent and child who have lost their connection to each other because the parent isn't feeling validated or appreciated enough. And the adult child isn't feeling those things either. I don't share about the estranged families as a scare tactic. I share it more like a reality check, because family relationships are fragile. They're also taken for granted as being guaranteed far too often. And the fragility of them is only evident once the damage is done. So if any of you have younger children, I think you're in a great position because you have an opportunity to avoid the future estrangement with the greatest chance of success. These things that parents make a habit that eventually drive their kids away are not things that you will be blindly doing after today. These expectations or understanding of the parent-child dynamic can be adjusted. Just as we are not bound to repeating our parents' mistakes, we're also not bound to putting unnecessary strain on our relationships with our kids either. Earlier on, I mentioned how I stray away from simply teaching my kids how to be good kids in favor of preparing adults for life in the real world. The foundation, that foundation, it's something to keep in mind here. When we spend 18 to 20 years teaching our kids to be good, teaching them what to think, how to do things our way, that we know best and we should be respected as authority figures, we set ourselves up for big disappointment when our kids get older. How many of you get upset when your kids are lazy? Be honest, right? Keeping that honesty going. How many of you do things for your kids because it's faster and easier for you rather than letting them develop their own skills? Now, does it really make sense to scold the kids for not doing what needs to be done when we've taught them that anything avoided long enough is going to get done for them? We tend to spend far too much time thinking about how to impose meaningful consequences when rules are broken or when expectations are disappointed. But what do you think would happen if we let things play out and let the natural consequences present themselves?
You know what?
Instead of, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, AC, you mentioned about that one. Because like parents, we're scared of, we're always there to catch them if they fall. We're
Hmm.
always there. But I was even, my supervisor was telling me, Cynthia, why are you so stressed out in terms of, oh, what will happen to my children, or what's going to, what if they'll do this and then they'll fall or what? And I told him, you know what? I don't want to, I don't want to see them in a casket or in jail. That's
Yeah.
the reason why I try my best to catch them if they're about to fall.
Hmm.
But I've realized that they will not learn, not until they fall. And
That's right.
and that's when the time when I fell also. I fell flat on the ground. That was the time I've learned my lessons as well. So it's just that we have that fear that you don't want them to experience that kind of problem. I
Yeah,
don't.
well, as parents, I don't think we're ever motivated by ugly motivations, but what we do is when we're operating from that place of fear, we're trying to run interference for our kids, we're trying to do things for them to protect them, whether it's from the casket or from jail or just even from inconvenience. At the same time, we interfere with the relationship we have with the kids. We also cause ourselves as parents a lot of unnecessary stress, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
Like I think about using my younger son as an example. I used to stress so much because he does a lot of trips for school, and he, more often than not, for the longest time, he kept forgetting to bring home the permission slips for me to sign. And I thought, well, what happens if instead of stressing that he's going to miss a school trip because he hasn't brought the slip home, instead of constantly reminding him to bring it home, why not just trust that if I remind him once, that's enough? And if he forgets anyways, well, I'll let him miss the trip, which happened. He missed the trip, but he learned a lesson, and I reduced my stress level significantly overnight. In fact, he missed a few things before he learned that when things are important, that he's got responsibilities within the situation. He's now learned that he's got to put things on his calendar. He's learned that deadlines for all of us of any age, they're a reality. Most importantly, he asked that sometimes all of us need to ask for help. Because like even as a dad, I need reminders too. So if I ask him to help me, he's quick to point out to me, you know what, Dad, you also have a calendar. And he's just as quick to learn that giving and getting help, they work in both directions, right? I didn't get that with my parents. And when I think of how much stress that they ate as a result, or how much they missed out on as far as relating to us as kids, I feel so sorry for them. I think what might have slipped past some of us, like with this whole exchange, is that I work on making the field of engagement with the kids as level as possible. Like I'm always going to be the dad, and they're always going to be the kids, and I can't change that. There's going to be that power differential, but I don't want to change that really either. What I do want to do is to um maybe minimize the power differential, and also at the same time learn how to navigate it in healthy ways. For an example, like if I think about if my mother, she's 81 years old, if she's having trouble with her smart TV again, it would be very, very easy to point out that she's struggling because she's old, feeble, and she's terrible with electronics, right? Easy, not healthy. I think a healthy approach is to point out that, look, there's no need to feel like a bother mom because all of us struggle sometimes. None of us are good at everything. And just a reminder that, look, I might be helping you today, but tomorrow you're going to be helping me with something different. That's life. Likewise, if my one of my kids comes to me with a problem, it would be really, really, really easy to fix it for them because I'm the all-powerful, all-knowing parent. Cynthia, I know you know what I'm talking about. I can see it on your face. It would be so easy to point out that they should have done what they should have done differently to avoid the problem, or how I would never let that happen to me because I make good choices. What would be more useful and actually healthy would be to ask my kids, like, what do you need from me? Ask them what they think needs to be done and what is the best way for me to support them while they do it. Like, does that make sense to you? Communication is important. And because it's so important, I can't help but wonder, like, why are we so bad at it? As I say that, I know at least one of you is probably thinking how that doesn't apply to you because you're an excellent communicator. And to whichever one of you that is, I hate to tell you, but you're in no position to make that claim. George Bernard Shaw once said that um, the biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. In the interest of being transparent, I have to admit that I think of myself as a great communicator. I choose my words very carefully. I watch people's reactions and I ask them if they have understood me. The problem is that effective communication isn't usually that simple. If the carefully cultivated message I send isn't the message that you receive or understand, I have failed to communicate. This is especially problematic when we are trying to communicate with our kids. Because as parents, we tend to go on a little bit too long. We use too many words, and in doing so, we lose the audience. Then we ask them, hey, did you understand me? They say yes because they want us to shut up, and the conversation is over. Maybe they tell us something that we don't hear because we're too busy knowing them better than they know themselves, at least in our own estimation. They see it in their faces, they hear it in their objections. And the next thing that happens is that they storm out of the room, screaming over their shoulder that we never listen just before the bedroom door slams. Okay. And anybody who's got adult children, you know that doesn't end just because they moved out of your house, right? Maybe instead of running out of the room and slamming the bedroom door, they're running down the driveway and slamming the car door. But either way, when they don't like what's going on, they are running away and a door is getting slammed. That is just the way it goes. So healthy communication relies obviously on the messages both being sent and received. I won't dwell any longer on this because I'm not really sure what else to add. I think it's obvious enough to all of us. Cindy, I know you know what I'm saying. So, a healthy relationship with our kids certainly relies on communication, obviously, as well as the other things that we've spoken about so far. But right now, I'd like to offer that it also depends on love. The thing is that with love, like communication, it actually matters how or if it's received as much as how it is offered. My parents always claimed to love me. They would get frustrated to the point of rage when I questioned that love. You know, I think of one time when I was 7 years old, I got so upset with my mom for not loving me that I decided I was going to run away from home. Now, I was 7 years old and I didn't know much about running away, so I don't think I did a very good job of it. I knew that I needed a warm bed and a teddy bear. I also knew that I needed to be close to food and something to drink and obviously a toilet. And keeping all of these needs in mind, I set up a camping cot in our garden shed in the backyard. I put a warm sleeping bag and my pillow for my bed on it, and I laid my teddy bear against the pillow so he'd be ready for me at bedtime. Now, I guess at some point while I was setting up this big runaway from home scheme, my mother noticed how busy I was out in the shed, so she came out to investigate. I can still picture the look on her face. What is this? She wanted to know. And I told her, look, I'm running away because you don't love me. And her response to that was, I don't love you? Let me show you how much I love you. And she grabbed me by the arm, she dragged me into the house, and she proceeded to spank my bum until it was every shade of red with her belt. Okay, so you can understand why from that story, her love wasn't always obvious to me. Now, I'm not suggesting that any of you have expressed your kids in similar ways, but I want you to consider that your kids might not have felt the love just the same. That the love you thought you were giving was not the love that they were receiving. So that raises the question, what is love anyways? Now, I like to define love as deep affection coupled with compassion, care, self-sacrifice, and concern for well-being. There's nothing wrong with feeling love towards our kids. The thing we, I think, need to understand and spend a little bit more time thinking about is how much they also need our compassion, care, self-sacrifice, and concern for their well-being. In fact, they need those things far more often than they need us to feel some kind of way. I've learned that my kids are more likely to accept that I feel the love when I've demonstrated it in all of the other ways mentioned. When we demonstrate our love, we can't help but set a healthy example of what love is for them. We teach our kids that just feeling that's not enough. This is a lesson that will increase the value of and stability of all of their future relationships too. I can promise you that. When we establish and cultivate and we maintain healthy relationships with our kids, we do so much more than invest in these to our own direct benefit. We also leave them with standards of quality that they can apply to every other relationship they'll ever had long after we're gone. We establish a healthy normal, which will hopefully be passed on to future generations, which I think is a beautiful thing. So just quickly, you know, the ways to recognize a healthy relationship, they include things like we care about each other's well-being. We go out of our way to do for each other. We love spending time together. We feel emotionally connected. We can be open with each other. We can be silly or serious, and we can see the value in both. We feel like we know each other in ways that aren't just on the surface. We accept each other's imperfections. We feel warm and affectionate towards each other. We're committed to being a part of each other, and we're committed to working on the relationship. Now, I won't go too deep into this because I did an episode on In the Blood called What is a High Quality Relationship, which explores this in excruciating detail. So I'll spare you the pain of all that right now. Now, when I was a kid, I heard over and over again about how much I would have a better understanding of what why my parents kind of sucked once I had kids of my own, right? You'll understand one day when you grow up. Thing is, I got kids of my own now, and I understand certain things even less now than I did when I was a kid. You know, I don't understand how a father could intentionally hurt his son. I don't understand how anyone could value hypocrisy or double standards. I don't understand so many things because I am not my father. On the other side, I understand certain things very, very well now. I understand that my father struggled with many of the same mental health challenges that I do. I understand that when a parent is overtired, unsupported, struggling with their marriage, any other number of things, kids can be extraordinarily difficult to interact with. I don't want to make excuses for my father, and I sure as hell don't want to make excuses for myself, but I do understand. And I'd like to believe that most of you understand as well. And I think all of us benefit from that understanding. If we want our kids to benefit as well, we need to use that understanding to motivate us away from the attitudes, behaviors, or techniques of our own parents, and instead be motivated towards taking care of ourselves and our kids. Yes, in that order. If we haven't taken steps to deal with our own stuff, like how could we possibly expect to be in a position to benefit them? Anyone who's ever taken a commercial flight is familiar with the safety demonstration that happens before takeoff, right? In case of an emergency, oxygen mask will drop down from the ceiling. They tell you to put it on your own face first before you help anybody around you. Because if you can't breathe, you can't help. And, you know, I think as parents, we often get so focused on making sure that everybody else can breathe that we suffocate ourselves in the process. Taking the time and the resources to keep ourselves emotionally fit is one of the greatest sacrifices we can make for our kids. It is not selfish, not one bit. Now, as we draw near to the end here, I want to take just a brief moment to talk about faith. I don't want to promote or attack anyone's personal beliefs. I have my experience, and I'm sure you all have yours. What I do want to highlight is the idea is that while prayer might be of personal comfort, we also need to develop practical coping and management strategies. Because when we get out of the habit of waiting for somebody to intervene, we're forced into the habit of working to solve the problems and address the challenges. This is good for our relationships with our kids on so many levels, like I can't even tell you. We try harder to understand them. We work harder to provide for them. We seek out professional help for mental and physical health concerns. Those two were big, big struggles for me. Most valuable things I ever did was start seeing the doctor for my physical checkups and to start getting into therapy. You know, I don't see a problem with relying to some degree on faith so long as you also rely on your abilities and your human support systems. What I'm hoping you'll take away from today is that we're not bound to following in our parents' footsteps, even if they did a fantastic job. They were raising different kids in a different time with a different understanding and a different outlook for the future. And interacting with your kids, that requires something different. So I'd like to thank all of you for listening to what I had to share today. I'd also like to encourage you to listen to my podcast called In the Blood, which is available on all major podcast platforms. And at this time, if anybody's got any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
I just wanted to say that I related a lot to your childhood because it sounded a lot like mine.
Well, my condolences, Cindy.
My parents were of the mind that children are to be seen and not heard. That was the mantra in our house. Children are to be seen and not heard.
Yeah.
And they were like 24/7. If you don't shut up, we'll make you shut up. You know.
Yeah, I
You
think a lot
cry
of
with
parents do that. And then they're surprised when their adult kids don't want to talk to them, right?
Exactly. Exactly. My dad passed away just last year. No, not
Hmm.
last year, year before. But he died and I didn't go to his funeral. I was
Oh,
not sorry about it either. But um, I have a great relationship with my own kids, though.
that's wonderful.
Yeah, I didn't make the mistakes with them that he made with me.
I think I've shared with you AC before in terms of showing appreciation during the podcast. And I
Yeah.
would just like to share because I was raised by my elders telling us, do this, do this, do that, because that's how they were raised as well. And when I was doing this pilot study at the World Bank, showing appreciation, I tried asking my kids, have I shown appreciation with you? They immediately said no. And I was shocked. It was like a slap on my face telling me that, oh my, never did I show appreciation. So I tried to do some self-reflection. I just stopped for a while. It was at the same time, no? But then I realized that never did we receive any appreciation as well. We were forced to study. Education was the best thing that they have shared with us. They valued education. They sent us to a private Catholic school. So we were expected, we're not rich, but we were expected to bring in high marks. So when they see that our grades were low, that means that's the time they will tell us, how come your grades are low? And if it's really low, there are times that we will be punished. So I was doing the same thing with my kids. So I would just tell them, okay, they were even excited showing their test papers. Oh, mom, I got 95. Why 95? Why not 100? And then when they got 100, why not 105? So that was the time wherein instead of staying with me, sharing their problems with me, they most of the time they would stay with their classmates. They would even make excuses to stay outside instead of staying at home. So when I told them that that was the impact that I have seen from them, I told them, I'm sorry. I didn't know that I was doing what I was what was my parents were doing to me, no? So I'm sorry. And that was the start wherein, and I tried learning what they want, what they've been doing. So whatever their interest, I would try to learn from those things and then come up with activities. We share what we have discussed. I mean, what they did in school, what are they, their hobbies and so on. So that opened the door for them to really be more, uh, uh, I mean, share their problems, share their stories, share their concerns. And up to now, I think I've shared with Jerry the one time that my son even, oh, I'm not, he shared something and then I was not asking for unsolicited advice. And Jerry even gave me an advice. So I am learning as they grow old, and I appreciate. Now I'm trying my best to be a good listener. Uh, uh, where are they coming from? So that's the thing that I would like to share.
I wrote down all these questions.
You have a lot of
Oh,
questions.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
I
Okay.
like a man who comes prepared.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
Jerry.
even though I was looking away at times, I was reflecting, and then I'd immediately write down what a couple of them are real softball. Like, where did "In the Blood" come from? Why that title? Why that?
My ex introduced me to an artist named John Mayer, and he had a song called "In the Blood," and the lyrics, it had a lot to do with him musing over which things he had inherited from his father, wondering if these negative things were things that were to do with things that he could grow away from, or if these things he was always going to be stuck with. And I kind of like that idea when exploring, relationships with others, with self, looking at this whole idea of like, I wonder all the time, like how much of my father is in me, these things that I didn't like. Am I destined to repeat his mistakes on some level, or do I have the capability of growing past that? And when I approach that kind of questioning, that sort of mindset in the day to day, and I love that question, actually. I know it probably sounded like a real softball one to you, but this really ticks on like what makes me tick in the day to day. I loved my father. When he died, he was my best friend. He was an abusive, horrible monster when I was a child. But when I became an adult, he owned up. He did everything to make things right. And he became one of the people I respect more than anybody else on this planet. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't miss that man.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't want to be some of the things he was, but I want to be other things that he was. Sorry if that was too long of an answer.
Well, that's okay. No, well, these people, they're used to my being long-winded, so. But I'll share this part with you. My father was not only a Christian, he was a pastor.
Mine too.
And yeah, so you fully understand legalism. Legalism to his children, grace to others, but I have three older brothers, and I saw how two of them just absolutely broke my parents' heart. And being the youngest, I watched this, and I swore to myself, I will never hurt my parents like my brothers have. Well, what ended up happening was I'm so focused on not doing what they did, I found my own way in how to break my parents' heart. So you carry this into adulthood. You don't understand why, because things you touched on early. Dad paid more attention to the church members than he did his own family. And so we basically grew up in a single parent home. The only time we really saw my dad was on Sunday. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. That was it. He was bivocational, so he had a full-time job with General Motors that took him away. It wasn't very often that he was at the dinner table with us during the week, but
Gary,
yeah.
can you turn your volume up, darling? Can't hear you properly, sweetheart.
Oh, I don't know if that has anything to do with my
Because
volume.
it's really good. But yeah, if you
Let's
could,
see.
that'd be great.
Okay, I'm certainly gonna try here, Daniel. Is this any better? No?
It's okay. I shouldn't have interrupted you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It doesn't, that's the speakers. Oh, well. Maybe it's meant that I don't share it. It could very well be. Audio settings, let's see what this will do. Oh, my microphone is way down. Is that okay now?
Yeah, you could probably take it away from your mouth now. That would get super loud.
Okay. Thanks, AC. I appreciate that. But anyway, you can take that, the anger, the hurt, the pain into your adult life. And unfortunately, carrying that into your adult life, I spilled it on my children. And it's amazing how this whole cycle came full circle after my dad died. And he died in his early 60s. And I was relieved when he died. And faith is extremely important to me. And it became my own faith that I no longer had to ride my parents' coattails. God became real to me and very personal to me. And he began to reveal things to me about my dad through people who knew my dad as a child. And I began to learn about my dad's hurt, like when his father went to prison. And at 13 years old, he became the breadwinner because his older brothers were off to war. They were coming out of the Depression. World War II was just kicking in, and here he has to quit school, of which he loved. And it was obvious through his writing. He had such a gift for writing. And but Dad never told us these things about him. It was from others that we learned it after he passed. And I began to see my dad as the same hurting child that I was, that spurred the anger towards him in my adult life. And the more that I was able to understand my dad as a child and what he experienced and the pain he carried, I was now not judging him. I was empathizing with him.
Yeah.
He was put in a very difficult spot at a very young age. And that man was braver. He had more courage than I'll ever have. At 21 years old, he was called to come to Chicago from a small town in Tennessee to start a church in a place he didn't know anybody. His church had commissioned him because people were leaving the South to come north for jobs. And so the churches down there felt it was important that they establish a church here for those families. They commissioned my dad at 21 years old to do that. I wouldn't have done it. Not going from a town of 500 people to a city of 1 million. Dad never told us these things. We found out later. The only thing I wonder is why Dad never told us. And so as I was sharing some of these things, in order for me to move on, I had to learn to forgive, and I had to learn that both my parents, we live in a fallen world where a bunch of imperfect people
And I think there's a smokescreen that children have that their parents are to be perfect. They're not. They're fallen human beings. And I had to come to a point in my life where I could say, mom and dad did the best they could with what they had. And that is what brought, I'll finish it by saying this. A lot of people say when they get to heaven, they want to see Jesus. I want to see my dad.
Yeah.
I want to sit down next to my dad. Just, he had such a way of, and in difficulties. When I first became a dad, I was going through a real difficult time. He got on the phone. He very gently said to me, he goes, Jerry, everything's going to be all right. And he said it in such a way that I could only believe him. And I want to hear, as I've gone through life and the challenges have been greater. And if I could just hear him say, Jerry, don't worry, it's going to be all right. I give my right arm. And I thank God for my parents, for their imperfections, their failures. They never meant to hurt me. They never meant to hurt me. And they only wanted good. They just couldn't provide it in all the ways that I had hoped they would, emotionally. I can't say that spiritually, because spiritually they did teach me about the most important thing that I need to know in my life. So I really appreciate the presentation, and I'll give the other people a break by not asking me the rest of these questions. But
you know what, Jerry, I would love to actually chat with you a little bit more, maybe even on my podcast. If you want to get a hold of me through Cynthia, that would be awesome.
Cynthia and I can arrange that. Yeah, we can arrange that. It's okay, that'll be great. And I'll send her a copy of these questions, and she can throw, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you a lot, AC.
I like some of the things you shared there, Jerry, about talking about how your parents didn't mean to hurt you. This is something that when I'm talking to my coaching clients, I like to remind them all the time, because especially when you're dealing with adult children who are hurt and they're angry at their parents for the terrible job that they think their parents have done, and they see their parents as being these monsters who have inflicted so much pain. I like to say, look, pain is something that is very, very, very rarely inflicted. Pain is something that more often than not is shared. We get so overfilled with pain, it spills out onto the people around us. We don't ask for that to happen. We don't want it to happen, but it does.
That's
It was
powerful.
the same with our parents, right?
Yes, that's powerful, AC. That's very powerful. I never intended to hurt my kids, and most times I didn't think I was.
Yeah,
But they
I
let
felt
me
the
know.
same thing growing up.
Yeah.
My parents' pain just spilled out onto me. I'm sure they didn't mean it.
Yeah,
They didn't know
unintended
what they were
consequences.
doing. They didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah. Cynthia, you got to keep the lines open here. This is too
Okay.
good to stop.
I don't know with the others.
Well, yeah, we can only
How about
we can
AC?
all go when we need to go.
Yeah, also for those who are unable to stay. But I don't know with AC. AC, are you still okay to answer some of the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. If I get bored, I'll just pretend I had a power outage and turn my computer off.
Uh-huh. So, yes, I will connect Jerry with you, AC. And I'm sure he'll be able to share a lot of things, a lot of insights.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
So here.
Okay, any other questions?
I want to thank everybody for sharing what they have. Sorry for showing up late, but things happen. I spent my entire life blaming my father, blaming my mother, not understanding the way things were, wondering why my father always told me I'd never be anything besides a disabled welfare bum, wondering why my mother would be physically abusive towards me. And it was many years later, within the last couple of years, did I come to realize it's not necessarily because they done the best with what they had. They done the best with what they knew. So maybe who's to say how their parents treated them? Who's to say that they never was raised up mistreated as well? So maybe that's all they knew. So that's the only way that they knew to raise their kids. So for my father to be saying that my entire life, you'll never be anything. I come to realize actually on his deathbed, when I was there, when he was dying, he looked at me and said, "You're gonna be okay, aren't you? You're gonna be okay, aren't you? You're okay. Everything's all right." And I was like, "But which is less than a year ago." I was like, "Yeah, I'm okay." He said, "I know." And so he said, "I can go now. I can go to heaven now. I've done my job here on earth. Now it's time for me to go to heaven and prove my worth." That was his last words. Yeah, I fully understand what it's like not to see things clearly as a child and not to exactly know how things are. But when you become an adult yourself, you can see things differently and see that, everything happens for a reason, I guess. It's just to find out what that reason is. And I'm sorry, but I just had to say that I agree with a lot with what was being said. And I relate to everything that's just being said. I could share a lot more, but I talk too much as it is. So thanks.
I apologize, Sheldon. Your words are so powerful.
Thank you, Sheldon. Thank you so much. How about the others? Danielle, you have been sharing a lot of comments. Would you like to share something, Danielle?
Maria's been waiting to share, so I might just let her go first and then I'll go after her,
Who?
if it's okay. Maria.
Who?
Maria.
Maria, she's had her hand up.
Maria. Oh, Maria. Sorry. Oh, there. Yes, Maria.
No, I just have a question for AC. I don't have a kid yet, so I just want to ask this just for future use. So since the world is evolving right now, and how do you maintain an open communication with your child in a world where they may be exposed to diverse viewpoints and information online? So that it won't be awkward, because I have not experienced open communication with my parents, especially my dad. So I just want to know, how would you do it?
It honestly, it's not something that has come naturally to me because it's not the way my parents were with me either. But I think with people in your age group, like the 20 somethings, maybe a little bit younger, you're kind of in a generation that has an advantage that the older generations have never experienced before, in that the playing field has leveled somewhat, whereas with the older generations, it has always been a case of the parents had more experience, more knowledge, and they would be teaching the children, and the children would have to just accept that. As technology and culture evolves, the world has changed so much where my kids teach me as much as I teach them. So I'm not just looking at myself like, oh, I'm the authority figure and they have to listen to me, and I need to learn how to navigate situations where we can approach each other in open, honest communication. That's just become the habit because I understand I'm a dinosaur. I was raised for a world that doesn't exist anymore. There's a lot of things I know, but there's a lot of things I don't know either. And my kids, they know things that I need to know. I just get in the habit of asking questions. And I love the fact that you're already thinking about these things, Maria, before you have children. The more you think about this stuff, I think the better position you're going to be in when kids finally happen. It's not going to be just a case of, well, kids are the next natural step. I'll figure it out. You're already worrying about it now. That's awesome. And I feel so good for your future kids. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it did.
You know what? Me, whenever I ask my children, actually my daughter, Leah, how could I do this, do this? Mommy, there's the best answer. Oh, what? Ask Google.
Or YouTube University.
How many times have I said something to my daughter?
Telling you, the children.
How many times have I said something to my daughter and she's looked me dead in the eye and said, Mom, Google it.
I think Google it has turned into the 2024 version of FU sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. I was going to tell Cynthia or Cindy, I have to shoot and tell you to do something else with it. Well, she said,
But there's so much. All the kids have digital devices now, and the virtual. They have every toy they can be imagined, and I think a lot of parents are giving them those to quieten them, and they're enabling them, and the kids are becoming spoiled, and I don't know, they're not less educated. I don't know. I don't have children.
You're on the money, Bernie. You're on the money. I had an interesting conversation with my youngest son just a couple of weeks ago, and it was about how I raised my kids. It wasn't real deep, but I did have a chance to share. The worst thing I did was I allowed TV to become their babysitter. It kept them quiet. It allowed me to have some time for myself. It was one of the most selfish things I could have ever done. And I told them, I said, if I could do it all over again, I would have never put a television in your bedroom. It was a way to get them to bed early. It was a way to get them to go to sleep. And this whole thing with technology, Brian, is the same thing. I know, and I can only speak for myself. I allowed the technology of the time. Game Boy, I think we remember Game Boy, right? I allowed those to be the babysitters, the caretakers of my children. And it was one of, if not the biggest mistake I could have ever made.
Yeah, a lot of parents have done that.
Yeah.
They still do that. It's so common. That is like the most common thing.
Well, it's almost replaced the children are to be seen, not heard.
Well,
Yeah,
we don't
that
tell
is
them.
fine.
We just guarantee that it's going to happen, right?
Yes, that's your point. So that way I don't have to hear you, but I know where you are. Like, yeah.
What I've learned to do, Brian, is like when my kid, I mean, I love the example of the virtual reality headset and whatever. Because my younger one, he likes to spend a fair amount of time inside the virtual world too. But what I do once in a while is I'll just go knock on his bedroom door and say, "Hey, I'm going to the grocery store. Do you want to come with me?" And I always feel weirdly awkward about making that request, but I've noticed that more often than not, he's just so happy to have that little bit of one-on-one time with me. We don't have to create these profound moments with our kids. Sometimes it's just when we can, we want to meet them in their world on their level, but we also want to invite them into ours sometimes too. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe there's something glamorous about going to buy some broccoli, but the conversation you have on the way to get the broccoli, I mean, these are moments that you can't pay money for, and nobody can ever take them away from you.
Yep.
It's quality and quantity.
Absolutely.
So, so I wanted to share a little bit. Obviously none of us are perfect, and I know I wasn't a perfect mother, but my son always came first. And I made it a point never to miss anything that was important in his life, even when I traveled for work. And he and I have always been very open, even at the age, he's now 45, and still he will share with me what's going on and be very open with me. And I'm open with him. And I've done that since he was little. I never hid anything that was important to life. I never hid from him. When I was going through the divorce, I let him know that it was a painful thing for me. It wasn't easy. And that it was not, it wasn't his fault. I made that very clear, but I also made it clear that his father and I both loved him, and that it was painful for me to have this happen, that it wasn't easy. And the funny thing was that my former mother-in-law said, never let him see you cry. And I'm like, why? Should I make him think that this was an easy thing? So, you know, I did my best to include him, to treat him with respect. I didn't use a TV as a babysitter. He never had a TV in his room. We didn't have a computer at the time. So our time was very important to us. If there was a problem and I needed to talk to him, I'd put him in the car. That was my favorite thing in the world to do, is put him in the car and we'd go for a ride and we'd talk. And, you know, he was captive. He couldn't get away unless he wanted to jump out while the car was moving. And we had the most wonderful conversations about what was going on with him at that time. And the same thing with my granddaughters. When they were in the car, they were, you know, there's no electronics. I would say to them, you're coming to visit me, not to spend time on your electronics. And they put them away. And I have a wonderful relationship with them as well. So it's possible. Like I say, I'm not perfect, but there are things you can do to open that communication and be there for them. So just wanted to share that. Another point of view, so to speak.
No, that's powerful stuff. That's awesome.
Actually,
Okay, I got about another 5 minutes or so, so I don't want to
Jerry.
rush anybody, but
Yeah.
Jerry.
Yes, dear.
Yeah, you're raising your hand.
Oh, was I?
Yes.
Oh, well, I guess this might be a good, honestly, the first question I wrote down, AC, was what's normal? What's normal? Where I was always comparing my parents to my friends' parents, and my friends' parents were always cooler than my parents. But yeah, you really got my mind working tonight, AC, and the one thing that I think maybe I did okay with my kids was I'm so proud that they're great communicators, and especially in writing, and that they embraced critical thinking, and I think that's one of the greatest gifts that that God gives us, is the ability to think and rationalize. And yeah, I really appreciate it. You've been great. I look forward to following up with you and doing a podcast with you. I've never done one of those. This lady Cynthia, she's exposed me to all this crazy stuff. You know,
You could be my guest as well, Jerry.
Oh, anytime, Cynthia. You know that. You know that.
I
Hey,
like
does
that
everybody
question.
know yesterday was Cynthia's birthday? So I think we should end this by singing happy birthday to her. What do we say? Ready? One,
And Derek.
two,
Jerry, can I ask a question while we have like a few more
three.
minutes?
Please, go ahead.
Eric's
Danielle.
birthday too.
AC, can I ask you a question though?
Absolutely.
I was actually thinking about everything, right? And a lot of generational stuff came up, right? So the transition between like, you know, gen whatever. If you were to have a child right now, what would you think in 10 years would be your greatest challenge in regards to like communicating effectively with technology, with all, even like political changes, environmental changes? How would you actually navigate as well? And just on the subject of, say, gender, right? For young people who are minors, right? Who are getting, say, they're transitioning from gender to gender. A lot of parents find themselves in a situation where they want to actually like be there for the child and support the process, but they don't really know where as parents they stand within that, especially when like there are government legislations coming in place where like they're stripping away parents' rights? How would you navigate around that?
Oh, my.
You know what? Your questions don't actually land that far away from my reality for a couple of reasons. One is I had a lot of time to think about how would I navigate the parental process if I was going to have a child right now. I did this a couple years ago because my wife and I had uh, a scare, which at my age, I'm turning 51 this month. So I'm a little bit
Happy
past my
birthday.
prime as far as like having kids, right? So I
Right.
started thinking about a lot of things. My energy levels. Could I be the same kind of dad that I was at 30 years old? Could I do things the same way? I mean, philosophically, mentally, emotionally, I feel like I'm in a better place now than when I was younger, but physically, can I hang? I don't think so. The complicated problems that these young kids seem to come up with, they seem a lot of the time well beyond my realm of expertise with my own kids. Now, when you talk about like the gender transitioning, well, I went through that with my oldest actually several years ago. And
I can hear the pronouns when you talk.
yeah, well, it kind of surprised me because when you're talking about other people's kids and you hear about, okay, well, my kid came out and something as simple as sexual orientation, that's way more easier than sexual identity, right?
Yeah,
Because we can
absolutely.
all relate to orientation. We're all attracted to somebody. We know, or at
Yeah.
least we know what it's like, but not all of us knows what it's like to be trapped in the wrong package. So like on some hypothetical level, I always thought, well, if it was one of my kids, I'd like to think I'd be open-minded. I like to think I'd be receptive. You know what the really surprising thing was, Danielle? When my kid came to me and said, look, Dad, there's something I need to tell you, and I'm not sure how you're going to respond. And it's this. And it was this, I hate to say confusion. It was just a case of like the kid being in the wrong package. I didn't have this emotional breakdown. My only question was, how can well, actually, I had two questions. One was, how can I support you? And what would you like me to call you? It doesn't have to be that difficult. Now, I'm glad that I don't have to deal with a lot of the things that the parents deal with now. Like, to take it back to your question, well, how would I deal with like some of these things with the technology? I think one of those things, cyberbullying, kid's gonna come to me and say, look, like I need help with XYZ. I don't necessarily have the knowledge to solve this problem for them. But again, like this goes back to my overall parenting philosophy is like, I don't have to be the guy with the answers. I just have to be the guy who's there. I just need to be supportive and I need to listen sometimes instead of talk and ask my kid, look, okay, like I understand this sucks. You're not going to look back on this one day and laugh. That we can agree on. We were all told that nonsense growing up, right? One day you'll look back and laugh. Are you laughing? Because I'm not. I tell my kids, you know what? I don't know what the solution is, but I'm willing to help you find it. I will back your play every step of the way. I would like to think that if I was going to start over from scratch, a brand new baby tomorrow, I just keep on building on that. Hopefully, my hip and my knees would hold together long enough to enjoy the child rearing process. But I mean, as far as the day-to-day problem solving stuff, I think it'd just be more the same. I hope.
Well, I can respect that, but I've worked with young people as a youth worker who have gone through gender transitions, and sometimes it's not pretty, and sometimes there is a lot of confusion, and sometimes even the child themselves are through the developmental stages that they are changing, and so they change as they progress through those different stages. Yeah, it's something to think about because I feel like as a society, when we become a society where we just blindly accept because the child believes, right? It creates larger problems within community. But then at the same time, on the other end of that, there are, there's the right to self-determination, right? and
Yeah.
the right for people to make their own decisions and be who they are. And so that line then becomes blurred when it's a minor, right?
It's
I don't
it's
know.
hard. Like with my kid,
I'm
we
not a
did
parent,
have a
you know, I don't have-
therapist involved, right? Like it wasn't like just blindly navigating this because my oldest is neurodivergent. There was a concern that kids that are ND, they tend to be a lot more prone towards body dysmorphia than say like a neurotypical child would be. And
Why
one of
do
my
you think that
concerns
is?
was, is this a confusing phase? Is this something where the kids
Mm,
got it wrong? Or is this the real deal? Because the real deal does happen, but so does confusion, as you've noticed being a youth worker.
of
And this
course,
is one
yeah.
of the questions I did bring to the therapist, saying like, hey, am I being a little bit too supportive of this? Should I be pushing back on it? And what the therapist advised to me, and I don't know
No
whether
therapist would ever say.
yeah, like I don't know like whether anybody agrees or disagrees, and I guess it's up to each person in their own situation to make that determination. But the therapist said, like in his opinion, whether it was a phase or whether it was like a real permanent transition, it didn't really matter. What mattered the most was that I was willing to explore this fully in a supportive way with my kid, which was my goal. My goal was not to say, okay, you were born one way, now you say you're another, I'm going to blindly accept that. I didn't blindly accept anything, but I did blindly support, because I do support my kid. And I figured if you wake up 2 years from now and decide, you know what, you don't want to be this way anymore, I'll support that too. But you're never going to be without your dad. That was always my goal.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah.
Okay, thank you
Thank
so
you for answering.
much. Yeah, thank you so
That's
much.
good.
I think it's already 9:40. I'm just being mindful
Yeah,
of
I do have to go, but I
yes.
really do appreciate everybody's time today. You guys have been
Thank
so
you.
fantastic to chat with. I appreciate your patience, because I do know I use a lot of words sometimes. And thank you so much, Cynthia, for giving me this opportunity. It was such a wonderful honor to be able to work with you a second time in such a short amount of time.
It's an honor to have you actually, AC, for again agreeing to be a guest here and then being my guest at my podcast. Thank you so much. And by the way, before we end, it's Eric's birthday today, so I would just like to greet Eric. Happy birthday!
Happy birthday, Eric.
Yes.
Happy birthday, Eric.
Yeah.
Happy birthday,
Thank you.
Eric. Happy
Happy
birthday, Cynthia.
birthday.
Okay,
Happy
AC, you need to meet
birthday
AC.
to you.
Happy
Happy
birthday,
birthday,
Cynthia.
Cynthia and Eric. Happy
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 birthday
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 to
to
us.
you.
to you.